Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
People always talk about the runner like he's cold, detached, unfeeling. But nobody really talks about what happens after he runs long enough to hear his own silence. Because that's usually when everything starts breaking. Not dramatically. Not all at once. It's smaller than people think. It's him staring at his phone at 1:12 a.m. after swearing he was done. It's hearing her favorite song in a grocery store and suddenly forgetting why he walked into the aisle. It's realizing the peace he said he wanted feels strangely empty now that he finally has it. And the worst part, sometimes the runner becomes the chaser too late. Not because he suddenly became emotionally evolved. Not because he had some magical realization. Sometimes he just loses the ability to keep numbing himself. And honestly, that shift is uglier than people think. He didn't leave dramatically. That's the part people misunderstand. There was no movie scene, no slam door, no speech about needing freedom. No final look before disappearing into the night like some tortured romantic character. It was quieter than that. Honestly, almost disappointingly normal. He just started becoming emotionally unavailable in small ways first, replying a little later, sounding distracted on the phone, needing time to think after moments that were actually getting too intimate. And the strange thing is part of him genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. That's what makes this difficult to explain. Because from the outside, it can look calculated, cruel even, like he knowingly pulled away while she sat there confused and overanalyzing every shift in his voice. But internally, it usually feels messier than that, more irrational, like someone slowly backing away from a fire they also want to stand inside. And he probably couldn't even explain why certain moments suddenly overwhelmed him. Not the big moments, the small ones, the moments that felt too real. Like when she casually touched the back of his neck while walking past him in the kitchen and his entire body tensed before his mind could process it. Or when she fell asleep next to him too comfortably. That one really got to him. Because there's something strangely terrifying about being loved naturally, without performance, without chasing, without games. Some men don't know what to do with softness that stays, especially if they secretly expect people to leave eventually. So instead they leave emotionally first, just in case. And at first, the distance actually feels like relief. That's the ugly truth nobody wants to admit. The first few days can feel lighter for him, quieter. He sleeps a little easier initially because the emotional intensity isn't sitting directly in front of him anymore. He tells himself he can finally think clearly. He starts romanticizing independence again, gets productive, answers emails faster, goes to the gym consistently for 3 days straight, starts reorganizing chores at midnight for no reason. Little control-based behaviors, tiny attempts to regulate emotions without admitting emotions are involved. And if someone asked him during that phase how he felt, he'd probably shrug and say something like, "I don't know, I just needed space," which is partially true, but not the whole truth, because space wasn't the real desire. Relief was. Relief from vulnerability. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from feeling emotionally seen. Because being deeply seen sounds romantic until it actually happens. Then suddenly it's unbearable. Especially for someone who spent years surviving through emotional compartmentalization. And he may not consciously realize that's what he's doing. That's important. People always assume runners are fully aware of themselves while hurting someone else. A lot of the time they're not. A lot of the time they're reacting from the body first. The nervous system decides something feels dangerous long before the mind creates an explanation for it. So he says things like, "I just need to focus on myself right now." But what his body is actually saying is, "This connection is making me feel too much, and I don't know how to stay regulated inside it." Those are not the same sentence. Not even close. And the contradiction gets uglier because part of him misses her almost immediately. Not enough to stop leaving, but enough to feel something strange in the silence. He notices it in stupid moments, reaching for his phone automatically during lunch before remembering there's no message waiting anymore. Hearing something funny at work and instinctively thinking, "I should send this to her." Then stopping halfway through unlocking the screen. It's tiny. Embarrassingly tiny. That's how these things usually begin. Not with profound realizations, with interrupted habits. And he keeps trying to convince himself the emptiness is peace. That's the dangerous stage. Because emotionally avoidant people often confuse numbness with clarity, silence with healing, distance with self-control. So he doubles down, stays busy longer, starts consuming content constantly because quiet moments feel weird now. Not devastating yet. Just uncomfortable in a low-grade way he can't fully explain. You know that feeling when the TV is still on in another room and you don't realize how much noise it was making until someone turns it off. That's what emotional withdrawal can feel like. At first, the silence sounds peaceful. Then, eventually, it starts sounding lonely. But he's not there yet. Right now, he's still in the phase where he performs detachment for himself. And honestly, sometimes for other people too. He posts more online, acts lighter around friends, makes casual comments like, "Yeah, I've just been doing my own thing lately." Meanwhile, he's checking her profile at 1 a.m. after 2 beers, pretending he accidentally collected. He stares at the screen for maybe 8 seconds too long, sees a new photo, feels something sharp in his chest, closes the app immediately, then opens it again 30 seconds later. Not to like anything, not to message her, just to look, which somehow feels worse. And this is where people misunderstand the runner dynamic completely, because they imagine confidence. But a lot of the time it's actually emotional fragmentation. Half of him wants distance. The other half keeps quietly reaching toward the connection in indirect, almost childish ways. Watching, checking, wondering, avoiding direct vulnerability while starving for emotional proximity. It's contradictory. And he knows it's contradictory. That's part of what irritates him, especially at night. Nighttime is usually when the performance starts cracking, because daytime gives him distractions, tasks, nice, stimulation. But nighttime removes the structure protecting him from himself. And suddenly memories become physical, not dramatic flashbacks, just small sensory things. The way she used to say his name when she was half asleep, the sound of her bracelet hitting the bathroom counter, the feeling of her sitting quietly beside him without demanding anything from him emotionally. That last one follows him more than he expected, because he keeps realizing she wasn't actually asking for as much as he made himself believe. That realization arrives slowly, annoyingly slowly, and usually after he's already created distance he doesn't fully know how to undo. There's also this strange moment runners experience that almost nobody talks about. The moment they realize they can't relax even after getting the space they thought they needed. That's when confusion starts setting in, because he imagined freedom would feel expansive. Instead, it feels emotionally flat, like eating without tasting food properly, like laughing socially but not fully connecting to it internally. And he starts asking himself questions he avoids answering directly. Why do I still feel restless? Why am I checking my phone this much? Why does everything feel strangely muted? But he usually doesn't sit with those questions long enough. Not yet. Instead, he shifts behavior again. Maybe he starts talking to someone new for distraction. Maybe he throws himself into work harder. Maybe he suddenly becomes obsessed with self-improvement. New routines, new habits, new playlists, new version of himself. As if emotional confusion can be outrun through productivity. And sometimes he even believes it's working. Until some tiny random moment destroys the illusion again. A scent, a restaurant, a sentence someone says with her exact tone. And suddenly there she is again inside his chest. Not fully, not romantically even, just present. Like emotional residue he can't fully wash off. And the uncomfortable truth, part of him resents her for that. Not because she did something wrong, but because he associates emotional intensity with loss of control. So now he's caught between two realities. The connection overwhelmed him, but the absence unsettles him too. And those two truths existing together make him emotionally inconsistent. Hot and cold, present then distant, certain then confused. One night he almost texts her, actually types it out. Hope you're okay. Simple. Pathetic, honestly. He stares at it for a full minute, then deletes it, throws the phone onto the bed like it offended him somehow, runs his hands over his face, walks into the kitchen, opens the refrigerator without being hungry, just standing there in cold light at 12:47 a.m. trying not to admit to himself that the silence is starting to hurt. Not enough yet to come back, but enough to disturb him, enough to make the relief feel incomplete. And that's usually where the shift quietly begins. Not with love declarations, not with awakening, just a man realizing distance didn't calm him down nearly as much as he thought it would. At first, he kept telling himself he was fine, not happy exactly, just functional, which, for a lot of emotionally avoidant people, feels close enough to peace that they stop questioning it. So he continued with his routines. Work, gym, music in the background constantly, random YouTube videos playing while he cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. Anything to avoid sitting in actual silence for too long. Because silence changes after separation. At first it feels spacious. Then one day, without warning, it starts sounding loud. And he doesn't notice the shift immediately. That's the strange part. The emotional unraveling rarely arrives in one dramatic wave. It leaks in slowly through tiny cracks in ordinary life. Like reaching for his phone in the morning before he's fully awake. Not consciously. His body just does it automatically. And there's always this weird half-second before reality catches up. That small instinctive moment where he still expects her name to be there. A message. A meme. A random thought she had at 2 a.m. Then there's nothing. Just notifications he doesn't care about. And he hates how disappointed that makes him feel. Because wasn't this what he wanted? Wasn't space supposed to help? He keeps trying to act normal about it. That's important. Most runners don't immediately collapse emotionally after leaving. They try to maintain emotional control long after the connection has already started affecting them internally. So outwardly, he still looks composed. He laughs at work, replies to people, makes plans, acts emotionally unavailable in a calm, almost convincing way. But internally, his nervous system is starting to betray him in tiny, embarrassing ways. He replays conversations he pretended didn't matter. Not the dramatic ones. The stupidly small ones. The way she once looked at him after he made some dry joke in the grocery store line. The way she said drive safe softly one night when he was irritated and barely listening. The moment she got quiet after he emotionally pulled away and tried to pretend she was overthinking. That memory keeps returning more than he wants it to. Because now, in retrospect, he realizes she probably noticed the shift long before he admitted it to himself. And honestly, that realization makes him feel guilty in ways he doesn't know how to process. So instead of processing it, he distracts himself again. But distractions stop working the same after emotional attachment settles into the body. That's the thing nobody explains properly. People think missing someone is purely emotional. Sometimes it's physical. Sometimes the body notices the absence before the ego does. His sleep becomes inconsistent. Not terrible, just off. He wakes up more during the night now. Starts sleeping with the TV on sometimes because the room feels strangely empty otherwise. He scrolls longer before bed. Keeps refreshing apps without even realizing he's doing it. One night he opens her profile again. Not intentionally at first. At least that's what he tells himself. He's already half asleep, scrolling mindlessly, when suddenly there she is. A new photo. Nothing dramatic. She's just standing outside somewhere holding a coffee cup. But his stomach drops anyway, because she looks okay, and that unsettles him more than sadness would have. He zooms in stupidly close on the picture, looking at details that don't even matter, trying to decode her emotional state through posture and facial expression like some emotionally confused detective. Then he notices someone commented something that made her laugh, and suddenly he feels irritated. Not angry exactly, just displaced. Like he lost access to something emotionally familiar and now the world is continuing without him. Which sounds selfish, because it is a little. And somewhere deep down, he knows that too. That's what makes the runner to chaser shift so psychologically ugly sometimes. The emotions aren't always noble. Sometimes they're immature, possessive, confused. Sometimes he misses her while still refusing to fully face what he did. Sometimes he wants comfort from the very person he emotionally exhausted. That contradiction starts eating at him slowly, especially during quiet moments. Driving becomes dangerous emotionally, not physically, just mentally, because driving leaves too much room for memory. He starts taking longer routes home for no reason. Music sounding different now. Songs he ignored before suddenly hitting too hard. There's one specific night he keeps replaying. Traffic light glowing red through the windshield. Rain barely touching the glass. And out of nowhere he remembers her sitting in the passenger seat one evening months ago, absent-mindedly tracing shapes onto her jeans while he talked about work stress. She wasn't even saying anything important. She was just there, listening quietly. And for some reason, that memory hurts more than all the emotional conversations combined. Because now he realizes how safe her presence actually felt. Not intense, not dramatic, just emotionally steady. And maybe that steadiness terrified him more than chaos would have. Because chaos is familiar to emotionally unavailable people. Consistency isn't. Consistency requires staying. It requires being known over time. And suddenly, he starts recognizing something uncomfortable. Part of him didn't leave because the connection wasn't real. Part of him left because it was becoming too real. That realization sits badly in his chest. And once it enters his awareness, he can't fully unsee it anymore. Still, he avoids action. That's another thing people misunderstand. Awareness does not instantly create emotional courage. Sometimes people know exactly what they feel and still remain frozen. So he continues doing strange, halfway behaviors. Checking her stories, but never responding. Typing messages, then deleting them. Opening old conversations just to reread certain parts. There's one voice note he almost listens to again. stops himself halfway, throws the phone down immediately afterward like the emotional reaction embarrassed him. Then comes the really confusing part. Relief and grief start coexisting at the same time, and that messes with him psychologically, because there are still moments where he feels relieved to be alone, moments where intimacy still feels overwhelming in retrospect, moments where he thinks, "No, I needed this space." But then 10 minutes later, he's sitting in complete silence, feeling emotionally hollow for reasons he can't explain. Both feelings are real. That's what makes this dynamic so difficult to understand from the outside. People want emotional clarity, clear love, clear rejection, clear intention. But human beings are rarely that emotionally organized, especially men who were taught to suppress vulnerability until it mutates into avoidance. So now he's trapped between craving closeness and fearing it, and the body keeps exposing him. He starts noticing how often he almost reaches for her, emotionally, digitally, habitually. He sees something funny. I should send. No. Bad day at work. She'd understand this. No. Can't sleep. Maybe I'll just. No. Everything becomes interrupted instinct, and the interruptions start exhausting him. One night, he finally admits something to himself internally that he would never say out loud to another person. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I thought leaving would stop me from feeling this much. And immediately another part of him responds. Did it? Silence. Then quietly. No. That's the moment the emotional control starts slipping. Not externally. Externally, he still looks distant. Maybe even colder now. That happens sometimes too. When runners start missing someone deeply, they occasionally become more emotionally avoidant temporarily, not less. Because longing makes them feel exposed, and exposure activates defensiveness. So now he's in this strange emotional limbo where he misses her, thinks about her constantly, but also resents how emotionally affected he's becoming. He wants relief from the connection while simultaneously craving it back, which creates emotional whiplash. Some nights he almost convinces himself to reach out. Other nights he tells himself it's better to stay away. Then there are the moments that really break him emotionally, the accidental ones, like hearing her laugh in someone else's voice. That happened once at a restaurant. A woman at another table laughed the same way she used to laugh when she was genuinely caught off guard by something, and his entire body reacted before his brain did. He looked up immediately, heart racing, actually expecting to see her for half a second. But it wasn't her, just some stranger. Still, the emotional reaction lingered afterward. He barely tasted his food that night, just kept staring out the window afterward, feeling strangely disconnected from himself. Because now the absence is no longer intellectual. It's sensory, physical, embedded into routine. And that's when the silence stops feeling peaceful entirely. Now it feels alive, like something sitting beside him in every room. Not screaming, just waiting. Waiting for him to finally admit that distance didn't erase the connection. It only removed the distractions that were helping him avoid it. This is the part people struggle to understand the most. The contradiction. Because once the silence starts hurting him, people assume he'll immediately come back. That would make sense, right? If he misses her, he should reach out. If he loves her, he should stop running. If the connection matters, he should finally be honest. But human beings are not emotionally linear like that. Especially not someone who learned to associate vulnerability with emotional danger. Sometimes missing someone doesn't soften a person immediately. Sometimes it makes them more defensive first. And that's exactly what starts happening to him. He thinks about her constantly now, Not in a cinematic way. Not staring dramatically out windows while sad music plays in the background. It's more invasive than that. More annoying. She starts appearing in the middle of ordinary life without permission. While he's brushing his teeth. While waiting for gas to pump. While pretending to listen during conversations at work. And it's rarely the big memories that get him. Not the deep talks. Not the emotional confessions. It's the painfully normal things. The way she used to steal fries off his plate even when she ordered her own. The annoyed face she made when he drove too fast. The fact she always turned the TV volume down during commercials because loud noises irritated her. Tiny details. Details his brain apparently decided to archive permanently against his will. And now those details are following him everywhere. But instead of reaching toward her honestly, he starts doing what emotionally conflicted people often do. Indirect proximity. Have contact. Emotionally safe forms of connection that don't require real vulnerability. Watching her stories. Checking if she's online. Rereading old conversations. One night he scrolls all the way back through their messages until he reaches a random conversation from months ago. Something stupid about food. He stares at the screen longer than necessary. Then suddenly his chest tightens because he realizes how easy things used to feel between them before fear entered the connection. Before intimacy started making him panic internally. And without thinking, he types, "Hope you've been okay." Simple. Neutral. Carefully casual. The kind of message designed to reveal emotion without fully admitting emotion. He stares at it, thumb hovering over send. Then the internal dialogue starts immediately. Just send it. No. Why not? Because what if she doesn't respond? You're already suffering. Yeah, but at least this way I still have control over it. That's the part people rarely say out loud. For runners, avoidance is often about control. Not power over the other person necessarily. Control over exposure. Control over uncertainty. Because once he sends the message, reality becomes external again. Now she can reject him, ignore him, sound distant, sound healed. And strangely, sometimes, emotionally avoidant people fear the other person being okay without them more than they fear anger. Anger still feels emotionally connected. Indifference doesn't. So he deletes the message. Immediately feels relieved. Then almost instantly regrets deleting it. That emotional whiplash becomes his normal state now. Reach, retreat, reach, retreat. Like his body and mind are operating on different timelines. And honestly, part of him starts hating himself a little for it. Not dramatically, just quietly. In those private moments where self-awareness slips through the cracks. Because deep down he knows his behavior doesn't fully make sense anymore. He misses her. He thinks about her constantly. Sometimes he even checks his phone hoping she'll break the silence first. But if she actually did, there's a chance he'd panic and pull away again. That's how emotionally split he feels internally. And the worst part is he knows how confusing that would be for her. That awareness starts haunting him, especially late at night. There's one night in particular where the loneliness really catches him off guard. He's sitting on the floor of his apartment eating takeout directly from the container because he hasn't had energy to cook properly in days. TV on, not watching it. Phone face down beside him. And suddenly he remembers a random night she sat cross-legged on his couch wearing one of his oversized hoodies complaining about how terrible the movie selection was. Nothing emotional even happened that night. No deep conversation. No intimacy. She was just there. Comfortably there. And something about remembering how natural her presence felt suddenly breaks through his emotional defenses for a second. Not enough to cry, but enough that the apartment feels unbearably quiet afterward. Enough that he finally whispers something honest to himself. I miss her. And immediately another voice inside responds. Then why are you still acting like this? Silence. Then eventually, I don't know. That's the real emotional paralysis nobody talks about. Not lack of feeling, lack of emotional integration. Part of him wants closeness desperately now. Another part still associates closeness with emotional suffocation. So every instinct contradicts the next one. He'll almost reach out, then convince himself staying away is more respectful. He'll think about seeing her, then imagine vulnerability and immediately shut down internally. He'll miss her deeply, then suddenly become cold and detached for 2 days straight. And during those colder phases, he almost convinces himself he's over it, until something triggers him again unexpectedly. A song, a scent, a phrase. One time, his friend casually mentions her name during conversation and he reacts too fast, too emotionally, just for half a second. But enough that his friend pauses awkwardly afterward. You still think about her? And immediately he shrugs, looks away, acts unaffected. I mean, not really. Lie. Terrible lie. He thinks about her every day, but saying that out loud would make it real in a way he still feels unprepared for. So instead, he changes the subject, then spends the entire drive home replaying the conversation in his head, because even now, he cannot fully admit the depth of what he feels without instinctively trying to escape it afterward. And this creates another painful contradiction. The more emotionally overwhelmed he becomes internally, the more emotionally unavailable he may appear externally. That confuses people, but it's real. Some men become quieter when they care too much, more avoidant, more distracted, more emotionally inconsistent. Not because the feelings disappeared, because the feelings exceeded their emotional capacity to process them cleanly. And now shame starts entering the picture too, because he's beginning to understand something uncomfortable. She probably experienced his confusion as rejection. That realization hurts him more than expected, especially because he can now see moments differently in retrospect. Moments he dismissed at the time, like when she asked softly, "Are you okay? You feel far away lately." And instead of being honest, he said, "I'm just tired." He remembers the look on her face afterward now, the quiet disappointment, the emotional withdrawal. At the time, he ignored it. Now it follows him round like unresolved guilt, because somewhere deep down he knows she was trying to reach him emotionally while he kept moving further away internally. Not because he didn't care, because he cared and didn't know how to stay emotionally open without feeling consumed by it. And honestly, that distinction matters psychologically, but it doesn't erase the damage. That realization humbles him. Quietly, painfully, one night he opens their old photos, which is always a mistake emotionally. He tells himself he's just curious, just reminiscing, but that's not true. He's looking for emotional contact without actual contact again. And suddenly there's this one photo that destroys him more than the others. Not even a romantic one. She's barely looking at the camera, hair messy, laughing at something off screen. And he remembers the exact moment. He remembers she was laughing at him because he burned breakfast and got irrationally defensive about it. And now, he's sitting there alone in the dark staring at that photo, realizing he hasn't felt emotionally relaxed with anyone else the way he felt with her. That realization scares him, because suddenly the loss feels real. Not theoretical anymore. Real. And still, he doesn't call her. That's the frustrating truth. Awareness alone doesn't immediately transform behavior. Sometimes people sit inside emotional truth for a long time before they become brave enough to act differently. And sometimes they never fully do. That's what makes the runner stage so tragic sometimes. He's no longer running because he feels nothing. Now he's running while fully aware he feels too much, which is worse. Because now every moment of avoidance carries self-awareness attached to it. Every deleted message, every almost call, every fake distraction. He knows. He knows she mattered. He knows the silence hurts. He knows he misses her. But fear still keeps interrupting love before love can fully express itself. And that internal battle starts exhausting him more than the separation itself. For a while, he genuinely tried to convince himself he was moving on, not healing. That word would have felt too emotionally honest. No, he framed it differently in his head. He called it focus, discipline, independence, getting his life together, which sounds healthier than it actually was. Because sometimes what people call self-improvement is just emotional displacement with better lighting. And he throws himself into it completely. Suddenly, he's obsessed with routines. Waking up earlier, going harder at the gym, listening to productivity podcasts while driving, answering texts faster than usual because staying mentally occupied feels safer now. There's always noise around him lately. Music, videos, background conversations. Anything to prevent his mind from sitting still long enough to wander back toward her. Because whenever it does, he feels it immediately. That ache. Not dramatic heartbreak exactly. Something quieter. Like emotional pressure sitting low in his chest all day. And he keeps trying to outrun it through movement. That's the strange thing about avoidance. It can look incredibly functional from the outside. People even compliment him during this phase. You seem good lately. You've been productive. You're glowing up. And he nods like it's true. Meanwhile, he's emotionally unraveling in parking lots after work because one random memory hit him too hard during traffic. But nobody sees that part. Nobody sees him sitting in his car for 20 extra minutes after getting home, because entering the apartment feels emotionally heavy now. Not because the apartment itself changed, because she existed there once. And now every room feels slightly off. There's this one evening where he starts cleaning obsessively out of nowhere. Not regular cleaning. Emotional cleaning. The kind where someone reorganizes kitchen cabinets at midnight because their inner world feels impossible to organize. He throws old receipts away, wipes counters that are already clean, rearranges bookshelves. Then suddenly he finds one tiny thing that belonged to her, a hair tie. That's it. Small black hair tie sitting near the edge of the bathroom drawer. And the reaction his body has to that stupid little object genuinely irritates him. Because suddenly he can't breathe normally for a second. Just standing there holding it while memories start flooding back too fast. The mornings she rushed getting ready. The way she'd absent-mindedly leave pieces of herself behind without realizing it. Tiny evidence she once existed naturally inside his life. And now, he's standing alone in fluorescent bathroom lights staring at a hair tie like it personally betrayed him. Jesus Christ, he mutters to himself. Then throws it back into the drawer too aggressively. Closes it immediately. Walks away. As if physically distancing himself from the feeling will stop it. But the feeling follows him anyway. That's becoming the pattern now. He escapes the connection externally. But internally, it keeps reappearing in fragments. And what makes this stage psychologically complicated is that part of him still enjoys aspects of being alone. That's the contradiction nobody wants to admit openly. There are moments where solitude genuinely feels easier. No emotional responsibility. No vulnerability. No fear of disappointing someone. Just him controlling his environment again. And for someone emotionally avoidant, control can feel dangerously similar to peace. So sometimes he leans into that illusion fully. He starts talking to new people casually. Nothing serious. Mostly surface-level conversations designed to create emotional distance from the depth he experienced with her. And for brief moments it almost works. Attention feels good temporarily. Flirting distracts him. Validation numbs things for an hour or two. Then inevitably something weird happens internally. A woman laughs differently than she did. Looks at him differently. Touches him differently. And instead of feeling excitement, he feels absence, comparison, emotional disconnection, which makes him frustrated with himself because wasn't this supposed to help? Wasn't meeting new people supposed to make the attachment fade? Instead, it's exposing how emotionally attached he actually became. And he hates realizing that slowly. Not because attachment is weak, because attachment means loss becomes real. One night, he's out with friends pretending to enjoy himself. Music too loud. People talking over each other. Everyone slightly drunk. And outwardly he looks fine. Maybe even happier than before. But then someone asks casually, "So, are you seeing anyone right now?" And his entire nervous system reacts before his brain does. Tiny pause. Too long. His friend notices it immediately. No. He shrugs casually. Not really. But internally the question lingers longer than it should. Because the truthful answer would have been more complicated. The truthful answer would have sounded something like, "No." And I don't know if it's because I still love her or because I'm emotionally incapable of fully letting anyone in right now. Maybe both. But nobody says things like that out loud in bars. So instead he takes another drink and changes the subject. Then drives home feeling strangely empty afterward. That emptiness becomes harder to escape lately, especially at night. Nighttime keeps exposing him, because during the day he can still perform normalcy. But at night, the performance weakens. He starts staying awake later than necessary, scrolling endlessly, watching random videos he won't even remember tomorrow, opening apps without purpose. And sometimes he catches himself hoping she'll post something, which feels pathetic to him, because this is the same man who insisted he needed distance. Now, he's emotionally surviving off fragments of indirect contact like a starving person pretending not to be hungry. And he knows how ridiculous that is. That self-awareness makes it worse. One night, he almost calls her, not because he has a plan, not because he suddenly figured everything out. Honestly, he just misses her voice. That's it. He wants to hear her say hello again. He stares at her contact for almost a full minute, thumb hovering, heart beating harder than it should. Then suddenly fear rushes back in. What if she sounds cold? What if she sounds healed? What if she sounds relieved to hear from him? But careful now. That possibility destroys him more than anger would. Because anger still leaves emotional access open. Carefulness means damage happened. Real damage. So he locks the phone instead, throws it onto the couch, runs both hands through his hair, and suddenly he feels angry. Not at her, at himself, at the entire situation, at the fact he can't seem to move forward emotionally, but also can't fully move backward either. That's the exhausting middle space runners rarely admit to. They think distance will simplify their emotions. Sometimes it multiplies them instead. Now every feeling arrives layered. Relief mixed with grief. Freedom mixed with loneliness. Desire mixed with fear. And the ego keeps trying to regain control through distraction. More work, more noise, more routines. But emotional truth has a way of leaking through anyway. There's this one moment that really shifts something internally for him. Small moment, almost stupidly small. He's grocery shopping late one evening, exhausted, emotionally detached, half paying attention to anything around him. And he walks past her favorite snacks accidentally. Without thinking, he reaches for them automatically. Just instinct. Like his body still assumes she exists in his daily life. Then halfway through picking them up, he freezes. Just stands there staring at the box in his hand while reality settles in again. She's not coming over. He's not buying things for her anymore. There is no later version of tonight involving her presence. And something about that ordinary realization hurts more than the dramatic memories do. Because this is the stage where grief becomes domestic. Not cinematic. Domestic. It lives inside routines now. Inside grocery stores. Inside empty passenger seats. Inside reaching towards someone who no longer exists in your daily structure. And suddenly all the freedom he fought for starts feeling strangely hollow. Because freedom without emotional connection can become isolation very quickly, especially when the person wasn't actually trying to trap you. They were trying to love you. That realization starts following him everywhere now. Quietly, relentlessly. And the worst part, he's beginning to understand she probably felt abandoned while he was busy convincing himself he was finding himself. That truth lands hard. Because now he can finally see the emotional imbalance clearly. She was trying to move closer emotionally. He kept stepping backward emotionally while calling it space. And maybe part of him genuinely believed he was protecting himself. But another part knows he also hurt someone who was trying to love him honestly. That awareness changes the loneliness. Before, the silence felt self-protective. Now it starts feeling deserved. And that's when the runner slowly begins turning into something else entirely. Not a healed man. Not an awakened man. Just a man running out of distractions strong enough to silence what he actually feels. At first, he thought the silence was temporary. That's important. Even while he pulled away, some unconscious part of him still believed she would remain emotionally available in the background. Not forever maybe, but long enough. Long enough for him to figure himself out. Long enough for him to return emotionally on his own timeline. Long enough for the connection to stay waiting while he wrestled with himself internally. And honestly, that assumption comforts a lot of runners more than they realize. The idea that someone is still there, still emotionally tuned in, still reachable, still quietly hoping, even if they never admit that dependence out loud. Especially not out loud. Because emotionally avoidant people often rely heavily on emotional safety they pretend they don't need. And she had become emotional safety for him in ways he didn't fully understand until it started disappearing. Slowly, quietly. At first, the changes are almost invisible. She stops double texting, stops asking if he's okay emotionally, stops trying to decode his distance. And because he's still distracted by his own internal chaos, he barely notices initially. Then one day he does. Not dramatically, just through one tiny interaction that feels off. He sends something casual after days of silence. A random joke. Something emotionally safe enough to avoid vulnerability. Normally, she would have responded quickly, warmly, even if she was hurt. But this time, hours pass. Then eventually, lol. That's it. One word. No emotional opening. No continuation. No hidden reaching. And his stomach drops harder than he expects it to. Because suddenly he feels the emotional distance reflected back at him for the first time. That changes everything internally. People don't talk enough about how shocking it feels when the chaser actually stops chasing, especially for someone who secretly relied on that pursuit to feel emotionally secure while pretending they wanted space. Now the emotional dynamic shifts, and he feels it immediately, like gravity changing direction. He reads the message again. Lol, why does it feel cold? It's not even rude. That's what unsettles him. There's no anger in it. No emotional charge. Just restraint. And restraint from someone who used to reach toward him emotionally feels terrifying. Because emotionally avoidant people often feel safest when the other person is emotionally expressive. Once that emotional expression disappears, uncertainty enters the room. Now, he doesn't know where he stands anymore. And uncertainty activates panic fast. Not visible panic. Internal panic. The kind that looks calm externally, while someone's thoughts spiral privately for hours afterward. Suddenly, he starts checking his phone more. Watching response times. Overanalyzing tone. Which is painfully ironic considering how long she probably did that with him. Now, he's the one rereading messages wondering, did she sound different? And the truth? Yes, she did. Not colder exactly. More tired. More emotionally careful. That emotional carefulness starts haunting him because it forces him to confront something he spent months avoiding. His inconsistency changed her. That realization lands hard, especially because he remembers moments where she tried to stay emotionally connected despite his distance. Moments he minimized at the time, like when she said, "I feel like I'm losing you." And instead of reassuring her honestly, he gave vague answers. Half comfort, half distance, enough affection to keep the connection alive. Not enough vulnerability to make it feel safe. At the time, he told himself he was confused. Now it looks different in retrospect. Now it looks like someone slowly exhausting another person emotionally while calling it uncertainty. And once that awareness enters his mind, he can't fully escape it anymore. That's when the panic starts becoming physical. He notices stupid things. She views his stories less now. Sometimes not at all. At first, he pretends not to care. Then one night he posts something intentionally hoping she'll react. Not consciously, maybe, but emotionally, absolutely. He checks his phone twice in 10 minutes afterward. Nothing. Then 30 minutes later he checks again. Still nothing. And suddenly he feels ridiculous. A grown man emotionally destabilized because one person didn't watch his Instagram story. But that's the thing about attachment. The smallest shifts start carrying enormous emotional weight once someone feels emotionally unreachable. Especially when you created the distance yourself. That's the unbearable part. Because now he can't even fully blame abandonment. He knows he initiated this emotional separation, which creates this awful psychological loop. I pushed her away. But why does it hurt this much now that she's actually pulling back? That contradiction keeps him awake more nights than he admits. There's one specific night where reality really hits him. He sees a photo of her out somewhere with friends. Nothing serious. Just normal life. But she looks lighter. Not performatively happy. Not trying to prove anything. Just emotionally less consumed. And his first reaction surprises him. Relief. Genuine relief. Because part of him always wanted her to be okay. Then, almost immediately after the relief comes grief. Sharp grief. Because suddenly he realizes she may actually be learning how to live without him emotionally. And that possibility wrecks him in ways he didn't anticipate. Not because he wanted her suffering. Because he unconsciously assumed the connection would remain emotionally open indefinitely. Now it doesn't feel guaranteed anymore. Now she feels separate, independent, emotionally reclaiming herself. And that's when the runner often starts becoming the chaser psychologically. Not because he suddenly evolved spiritually overnight. Because emotional access no longer feels secure. Now he feels the potential lustfully. And honestly, he starts acting strange because of it. More reactive. More emotionally impulsive. He almost messages her multiple times. Deletes half the drafts. One of them says, "You've been distant lately," which is such a painfully ironic thing for him to type that he actually laughs bitterly at himself afterward. Another says, "Is everything okay between us?" Again, irony. Because now he's experiencing the exact emotional uncertainty he created. And part of him knows he deserves it. That awareness doesn't make it hurt less, though. If anything, it hurts more. Because now guilt attaches itself to longing. That combination becomes emotionally brutal. One night he finally sends something small. Just, "Hey, been thinking about you." Simple. Honest enough to mean something. Careful enough to remain emotionally survivable. Then the waiting begins. And waiting changes him immediately. Now he understands what emotional vulnerability actually feels like from the other side. The checking. The anticipation. The stomach drop every time the phone lights up. Hours pass. No response. And suddenly his own apartment feels emotionally hostile. He tries distracting himself. Turns on TV. Turns it off. Walks into the kitchen. Drinks water he doesn't even want. Then checks the phone again. Still nothing. That silence destroys his emotional composure faster than he expected. Because now he finally understands something painful. When someone becomes emotionally tired, they stop reacting immediately. Not because they stop caring. Because they got exhausted carrying emotional weight alone. And he can feel that exhaustion in her silence now. That realization breaks through his ego more than any dramatic argument could have. Because anger would have still meant emotional investment. But this feels like someone slowly detaching for survival. And suddenly he remembers all the times she probably waited anxiously for him while he disappeared emotionally. The delayed replies. The emotional ambiguity. The inconsistency. Now he's sitting inside that same uncertainty himself. And it humbles him fast. There's this internal conversation he starts having more often lately. She's pulling away. "You wanted space. Not like this. What did you think would happen?" Silence. Then quietly, "I thought she'd stay." That's usually the hidden truth underneath the runner's panic. He expected her love to outlast his confusion. Expected emotional permanence despite emotional inconsistency. And when that illusion breaks, something inside him destabilizes completely. Because now the connection no longer feels emotionally available on demand. Now there's risk. Real risk. She may stop waiting. She may stop hoping. She may stop emotionally orienting herself around him entirely. And suddenly he realizes something devastating. The person he kept running from emotionally was also the person making him feel emotionally safe the entire time. Now that safety is disappearing. And for the first time since the separation began, he's no longer just missing her. He's afraid of losing her. This is usually the point where the emotional reversal becomes impossible to ignore. Not just intellectually, physically. Now she's an everything. Not in a romanticized movie way either. It's more invasive than beautiful. He feels her absence in routine, in silence, in muscle memory. And the worst part, he can no longer pretend the distance is helping him. That illusion is gone now. The space he fought for started turning against him weeks ago, but now it's undeniable. Now, even distractions feel thin. Temporary. He goes out with friends and still thinks about her on the drive home. He talks to other people and compares their emotional energy to hers unconsciously. He laughs during conversations and then suddenly feels emotionally empty 2 minutes later for no obvious reason. It's exhausting because he's beginning to realize something humiliating. He didn't stop needing her emotionally just because he avoided her. That truth attacks his ego from every angle, especially if he built his identity around self-sufficiency, around emotional control, independence, detachment. Now, suddenly he's becoming emotionally reactive in ways he doesn't recognize in himself. Checking his phone constantly, rereading old messages, feeling irrationally affected by tiny things she probably doesn't even realize she's doing. And shame starts wrapping around all of it. That's the part people don't talk about enough. The runner becoming the chaser often comes with deep embarrassment, because now he's emotionally trapped inside the same uncertainty he once created for someone else. And he knows it. That awareness changes the emotional texture completely. Now every moment of longing carries guilt attached to it. He misses her, but also knows he hurt her. He wants closeness, but feels undeserving of it. He wants reassurance, but remembers how inconsistent he was when she needed it. That combination creates emotional chaos internally. There's one night where he almost breaks completely. Not externally. No dramatic breakdown. Just one of those quiet moments where emotional reality finally corners someone. He's lying in bed, unable to sleep again. Phone in his hand. Dark room. TV playing low in the background, even though he's not watching it. And somehow, he ends up rereading their old messages from the beginning, which is dangerous emotionally, because now he can see the progression clearly. The warmth, the openness, the effort she made. And then slowly, his emotional withdrawal starts appearing between the lines. Shorter replies, delay affection, vagueness. He notices things now that he couldn't see while he was inside his own avoidance. Like how often she tried to emotionally reconnect gently instead of confronting him aggressively. How are you feeling lately? You seem distant. Did I do something wrong? God, that last one destroys him now, because she was blaming herself for changes happening inside him that he didn't even fully understand himself. And instead of reassuring her honestly, he kept retreating emotionally while calling it confusion. Now he's staring at old conversations, feeling sick to his stomach because hindsight removes the emotional excuses. Not entirely, but enough. Enough that he can no longer fully romanticize his avoidance as needing space. Some of it was fear. Some of it was immaturity. Some of it was emotional cowardice. And admitting that to himself hurts. A lot. There's this moment where he reads one specific message from her. Months old. Completely ordinary at the time. I just miss you when you disappear emotionally like this. Simple sentence. No manipulation. No anger. No pressure. Just honesty. And suddenly, he has to put the phone down because the guilt hits too hard. He gets out of bed, walks into the kitchen, opens the refrigerator without purpose again. That's becoming a habit lately. Standing in cold light trying to regulate emotions he never learned how to process directly. And internally the conversation starts again. You hurt her. I know. Then why didn't you stop? I don't know. Yes, you do. Silence. Then eventually, because it scared me how much I cared. That's the ugly honesty underneath a lot of avoidant behavior. Not lack of feeling. Fear of dependency. Fear of emotional exposure. Fear of losing control inside intimacy. But here's the tragedy nobody prepares him for. Avoidance doesn't prevent emotional pain. It delays it. And usually by the time it catches up, there's damage attached. Now he wants closeness desperately, but the closeness no longer feels safely available. That changes everything psychologically, because earlier, even while running, part of him still assumed she emotionally belonged to the connection. Now she feels separate, guarded, possibly moving on. And suddenly his nervous system starts reacting to that loss of access intensely. He notices tiny things obsessively now. Changes in her tone, how long she takes to respond, whether she sounds emotionally present or politely distant. One day she responds to him warmly for the first time in a while. Nothing dramatic, just slightly softer. And the relief he feels is honestly disproportionate. It changes his whole mood instantly, which irritates him, because now he realizes how emotionally dependent he's become on fragments of connection from someone he once insisted he needed distance from. That contradiction humiliates him privately, especially because part of him still resists vulnerability even now. That's what makes this phase so emotionally messy. The longing is real. The fear is also real. So he becomes inconsistent again. He reaches toward her emotionally, then panics afterward. There's one night he finally lets himself be vulnerable during a conversation. Not fully, but more honest than usual. He admits he's been struggling emotionally, admits he misses her, and for a moment the connection opens again. He feels it immediately. Warmth, relief, emotional closeness returning. And instead of fully relaxing into it, his nervous system starts panicking. Because intimacy after emotional distance feels overwhelming once it becomes real again. So the next day, he withdraws slightly, not intentionally to hurt her, instinctively, like someone touching a hot surface too quickly after craving warmth. And afterward, he hates himself for it. Because now he can see the cycle happening in real time. Reach, fear, retreat, regret, over and over. And what makes it worse is that she's changing now too. Less emotionally impulsive, more careful with her energy, which means his inconsistency affects her differently now. Earlier she chased clarity. Now she protects herself. That shift terrifies him more than anger ever did, because he can feel her learning how to emotionally survive without him. And the closer she gets to emotional detachment, the more emotionally frantic he becomes internally. Not externally, maybe. Externally, he may still look composed. That's another painful misunderstanding. A lot of runners look calm while emotionally collapsing internally, especially men conditioned to suppress visible vulnerability. So instead of openly unraveling, it leaks out sideways. Insomnia, obsessive thinking, emotional irritability, checking the phone every 10 minutes while pretending not to care. He starts replaying physical memories more now too. Specific moments. The way she curled against him half asleep. The feeling of her hand resting absent-mindedly on his chest during movies. The way she looked at him quietly when she felt emotionally connected. Those memories affect him differently now. Before, intimacy overwhelmed him. Now, the absence of intimacy overwhelms him. That reversal feels psychologically disorienting. And deep down, another uncomfortable truth starts surfacing. Part of him resents her for no longer chasing him the same way. Not because she's wrong, because her withdrawal forces him to finally confront his own emotional dependence. And dependence scares him. Still, even now. That's why this transformation isn't clean or spiritually graceful like people romanticize online. It's messy, human, contradictory, Sometimes he misses her deeply while simultaneously feeling irritated that he needs her emotionally at all. Sometimes he wants to hold her and disappear from her life in the same week. Sometimes he imagines reconnecting fully, then immediately imagines the vulnerability that would require and shuts down internally again. He's fighting himself now more than he's fighting the connection. And honestly, that's exhausting him. There's this quiet realization he has one night while driving alone. No music playing, just road noise. And suddenly he understands something painful. When she was chasing him emotionally, he still had the luxury of avoidance. Now that she's stepping back emotionally, he has to feel everything himself. The longing, the uncertainty, the fear, the waiting. And suddenly he understands why she sounded tired near the end. Because emotional inconsistency exhausts the nervous system over time. Now he's living inside that same exhaustion himself. And for the first time, he doesn't just miss her. He understands the emotional loneliness he created between them, which somehow hurts even more. This is where people get the story wrong. They imagine the runner finally waking up one morning completely transformed, suddenly emotionally available, suddenly fearless, suddenly ready to fight for love with crystal clarity and poetic speeches. That's usually not what happens. Most of the time, the runner becoming the chaser looks awkward, inconsistent, emotionally clumsy, human, and honestly a little frustrating. Because by this point, he does feel the loss deeply now. That part is real. But emotional realization and emotional skill are not the same thing. Just because someone finally understands what they feel doesn't mean they suddenly know how to express it cleanly. Especially if vulnerability still terrifies them underneath everything. So now he starts reaching for her, but in fragments. Indirectly first, he sends things that technically mean nothing emotionally while secretly hoping they mean everything. A random meme, a song link with no explanation. This reminded me of you text sent at 11:48 p.m. because nighttime weakens his emotional defenses again. And every time he sends something, there's this horrible few seconds afterward where panic hits immediately. Why did I send that? Did that sound desperate? Was that too much? Too little? Should I send another message? No, don't do that. Leave it alone. His nervous system becomes chaotic during even the smallest emotional interactions now. Because he's no longer emotionally protected by distance the same way. Now he actually cares about the outcome. That changes everything. Earlier, avoidance gave him psychological control. Now he's emotionally exposed. And exposure makes him act strange sometimes. There are moments where he genuinely wants closeness. Then moments, sometimes minutes later, where he suddenly feels trapped by the emotional intensity again. That contradiction doesn't disappear just because he misses her more now. If anything, it becomes stronger. Because now there's more at stake emotionally. There's this one conversation where she responds warmly to him for the first time in weeks. Actually warm. Not just polite. And the emotional relief he feels is so immediate it almost scares him. He smiles at his phone without realizing it. Reads her message 3 times. Suddenly the entire day feels lighter, which is honestly dangerous emotionally. Because now his emotional state is becoming directly tied to her emotional availability again. And deep down he knows that. Part of him loves the feeling. Part of him resents needing it. That resentment creates another layer of emotional inconsistency. Sometimes right after intimacy returns, he pulls away again. Not because he's stopped caring. Because closeness activates fear almost as quickly as distance activates longing. So now the cycle becomes even more confusing from the outside. He reaches out emotionally, then disappears for a day. He says he misses her, then suddenly becomes emotionally hard to read again. And honestly, sometimes he hates himself while doing it, because now he can see the damage happening in real time. There's one night where he sends her a long message, not perfectly written, not polished, just emotionally messy honesty spilling out faster than he can regulate it. He tells her he's been thinking about her constantly, tells her he misses the way things used to feel, admits he's been emotionally confused. Then, immediately after sending it, he spirals, throws the phone onto the bed, gets up, starts pacing around the apartment, internal dialogue firing non-stop. You shouldn't have sent that. But it was true. Yeah, but now you look weak. Why is honesty weakness? Silence. Then quietly. Because now she can hurt you. That's the real fear underneath a lot of masculine avoidance. Not emotion itself. Exposure. The possibility that someone now has emotional access to your softer parts. And once that fear activates again, he starts becoming inconsistent immediately afterward. She responds kindly, openly, and instead of fully relaxing into the connection, he suddenly takes longer to reply, emotionally hesitates, overthinks everything, because now he's terrified of needing her too much. That's what makes this stage so psychologically exhausting. He chased the emotional connection back, then panics once he starts feeling emotionally attached again. It's like watching someone thirst desperately for water, and then become afraid of drowning the second they finally touch it. And from her side, this inconsistency probably feels maddening, because now he's the one initiating contact, the one reopening emotional doors. But he still can't sustain vulnerability consistently without getting overwhelmed. One day he'll sound emotionally open. The next day he'll suddenly feel distant again. Not intentionally manipulative, emotionally dysregulated. There's a difference. Not that the difference always makes it hurt less. That's another uncomfortable truth. Someone can genuinely love you and still lack the emotional capacity to love you steadily. And he's starting to realize that about himself now, which honestly destroys parts of his self-image. Because internally he probably imagined himself as independent, logical, emotionally controlled. Now he's watching himself become reactive over delayed text responses and subtle changes in tone. He notices everything now. If she sounds slightly colder, it ruins his mood. If she sounds warm, he feels temporary relief. If she takes too long to respond, his mind spirals instantly. And suddenly he understands what emotional insecurity actually feels like firsthand. Not conceptually, physically. There's one moment where he sees her active online after not responding to him for hours. And the emotional reaction he has genuinely embarrasses him. Immediate stomach drop. Instant overthinking. Who is she talking to? Why is she ignoring me? Did I say too much? Then another part of him cuts in immediately. You did this to her for months. That voice is becoming harder to silence now, because the emotional empathy is finally arriving alongside the longing. Now he understands the nervous system confusion he created in her. The waiting, the uncertainty, the emotional guessing. And honestly, part of him starts grieving the version of her that used to chase him openly. Because she's different now. More emotionally self-protective. More measured. Less willing to emotionally overextend herself for someone inconsistent. Which is healthy. But for him, it feels like emotional withdrawal. And that loss activates even more chasing behavior internally. He starts replaying memories obsessively now. Specific moments where she loved him gently and he didn't fully receive it. The way she checked on him emotionally. The patience she had with his moods. The softness in her voice during vulnerable conversations. At the time, parts of him felt overwhelmed by that emotional closeness. Now, those same memories feel unbearably tender. That delayed emotional processing hurts more than immediate heartbreak sometimes. Because now he realizes what he had after he destabilized it. And the regret arrives in waves. Not constant. That's important. Some days he still wants to disappear emotionally again. Some days vulnerability still feels unbearable. That contradiction remains alive inside him. One afternoon, he almost ignores her message intentionally just to regain emotional control internally. That's how deep the fear still runs. Closeness makes him feel emotionally exposed. So sometimes he subconsciously recreates distance to calm himself down, even while missing her, even while wanting connection. And afterward, he sits there frustrated with himself because none of his behavior fully aligns with what he actually feels. That internal fragmentation exhausts him, especially at night. Night keeps stripping him emotionally bare. There's one scene that stays with him. He's sitting in his car outside his apartment after another emotionally vulnerable conversation with her. Engine off. Dark parking lot. Phone still in his hand. And for a moment, he just sits there breathing hard like emotional intimacy physically exhausted him. Because honestly, it did. Vulnerability feels physically intense for people who spent years emotionally armored. And suddenly this thought hits him. She made me feel loved and terrified at the same time. That realization sits heavily in the silence afterward, because it explains so much. Why he ran, why he misses her, why he keeps reaching and retreating, why closeness still scares him even now. And somewhere deep down, another painful truth is forming slowly. He thought chasing would feel relieving once he finally admitted his feelings. Instead, it feels vulnerable, unstable, humbling, because now he's emotionally standing in the exact position she once stood in alone, wanting reassurance, wanting consistency, wanting emotional clarity from someone who keeps fluctuating internally. Except now, the fluctuating person is him. And for the first time, he truly understands how exhausting that feels. The strange thing about delayed regret is that it rarely arrives all at once. It sneaks in quietly, through memories that didn't seem important at the time. That's what starts happening to him now. Not dramatic flashbacks, not movie scenes, just tiny moments returning with emotional weight they didn't carry before. And honestly, that's almost worse. Because now, he isn't haunted by the relationship itself. He's haunted by the ordinary tenderness he failed to fully notice while it was happening. The way she used to wait half asleep for him to get home. The way she looked at him when he was talking about something he cared about without even realizing she was doing it. The small pauses in conversations where she wanted reassurance, but tried not to ask for too much directly. Those are the memories that start undoing him. Not because they're tragic, because they were real. And reality becomes painful once emotional distance removes distraction. There's one memory in particular he keeps replaying lately. It's stupidly small. They were driving somewhere late at night. No deep conversation happening. She was sitting quietly in the passenger seat, her head against the window slightly, absent-mindedly tracing circles onto the sleeve of her hoodie. At one point, she looked over at him and smiled softly for no reason. That's it. Nothing profound happened. But now he can't stop replaying it. Because at the time, he barely registered the moment emotionally. He was distracted. In his head, emotionally halfway defended against intimacy already. Now, suddenly, that exact memory feels unbearable. Because he realizes she wasn't asking for anything complicated in that moment. She was just happy to be beside him. And something about recognizing how simple her love actually was breaks his heart a little. That's the brutal part about hindsight. Sometimes you don't understand emotional safety until you lose access to it. And now he's seeing everything differently. Conversations sound different in retrospect. Her silences sound different. Even her patience feels different now. Especially the patience. Because he's starting to realize how long she emotionally stayed present while he fluctuated internally. Longer than he deserved, maybe. That realization creates this awful mix of gratitude and guilt inside him. And guilt changes memory. Now every ignored moment comes back sharper. There is another memory that keeps returning unexpectedly. One evening she asked him quietly, "Are you still happy with me?" At the time he answered too quickly, "Yeah, of course." But now, months later, he remembers the expression on her face after he said it. Like she wanted to believe him, but didn't fully feel him emotionally there anymore. And suddenly, he understands something painful. She was sensing his emotional withdrawal long before he admitted it to himself. That realization follows him round for days afterward. Because now, he keeps replaying all the moments she tried to emotionally reach him gently instead of demanding answers aggressively. And he can see now how often she softened herself emotionally to avoid overwhelming him. That hurts him deeply once he notices it. Especially because part of him genuinely loved her while still emotionally failing her at the same time. That contradiction becomes impossible to escape now. He starts remembering physical details more intensely too. Not sexual memories. Softer things. Domestic things. The sound of her walking barefoot through the apartment. The way she stole his hoodies, but never gave them back properly. The fact she always touched his arm lightly when she walked past him. Tiny unconscious gestures of affection he barely acknowledged while they were happening. Now they feel enormous. Because now he understands those moments were intimacy too. Not just the deep talks. Not just the emotional conversations. The everyday tenderness counted. And he didn't fully receive it while he had it. That realization sits heavily inside him. Especially late at night. There's one night where he can't sleep at all. Round 2:30 a.m. he gets up and starts wandering around the apartment again. No real purpose. Just restless. Emotionally overstimulated by his own thoughts. He opens random drawers. Looks through old things. Ends up finding an old receipt from some meaningless night they spent together months ago. And suddenly he remembers the entire evening in vivid detail. The restaurant. The way she laughed at something dumb he said. The way she got quiet afterward because she was tired, but still wanted to stay out with him longer. At the time, he was emotionally distracted. Thinking about work. Thinking about needing space. Thinking about himself constantly. Now, he would give anything to relive one ordinary hour with her fully present emotionally. That's the cruelty of delayed awareness. Sometimes, emotional clarity arrives after the nervous system finally stops defending itself. And by then the relationship has already changed. There's also this uncomfortable shift happening internally now, where he starts seeing her pain more clearly than before. Earlier, he mostly experienced his own overwhelm. Now, he's beginning to emotionally imagine what the relationship probably felt like from her side. That destroys him in quieter ways. Because he remembers moments where she went silent during arguments instead of escalating. At the time, he interpreted that silence as emotional pressure. Now, he realizes some of it was heartbreak, exhaustion. There's one memory he keeps trying not to replay. They were lying in bed after one of his emotionally distant phases. And she asked him softly, "Why do I feel alone even when I'm with you sometimes?" God. That sentence hits differently now. At the time, he shut down emotionally almost immediately after hearing it. felt accused, cornered, misunderstood. Now he understands she was trying to describe emotional loneliness while still loving him. And the worst part is he didn't know how to meet her there emotionally. So instead he withdrew further, which probably confirmed her fear. That realization genuinely sickens him sometimes, because now he can trace the damage backward. Now he sees how emotional inconsistency slowly erodes safety between two people. Not dramatically, gradually, one delayed response at a time, one emotionally unavailable moment at a time, one avoided conversation at a time. And suddenly he understands why she became more careful emotionally near the end. Not because she stopped loving him, because loving someone emotionally inconsistent eventually exhausts the body. Now he feels that exhaustion himself. That symmetry humbles him deeply. There is another strange thing happening too. The more memories return, the less idealized she becomes. Which sounds negative, but it isn't. Earlier he missed her abstractly. Now he misses her specifically. Her actual humanity. The little annoyed expressions. The weird jokes. The emotional sensitivity she tried to hide sometimes. And somehow that makes the loss feel even more real. Because now he's not grieving fantasy. He's grieving a real person he emotionally struggled to hold properly. One afternoon, he almost calls her after remembering something random she once said. Not even emotional. Just a stupid comment about how she hated when people left cabinet doors open. He catches himself smiling at the memory instinctively. Then, almost immediately after comes grief again. Because memory has become emotionally automatic now. She exists everywhere inside him. Inside routines. Inside objects, inside silence. And what hurts most is realizing how many moments he mentally rushed through while trying to protect himself from vulnerability. Now, those same moments feel sacred in retrospect. There's this internal conversation that keeps happening lately. You loved her. I know. Then why couldn't you stay emotionally present? Silence. Then eventually. Because being loved that deeply scared me. Why? Because I knew she could hurt me if she ever left. Another silence. Then quietly. And now. Now he finally understands the terrible irony underneath everything. He spent so much energy trying to avoid future pain that he slowly created the very loss he feared. That realization changes him. Not instantly. Not cleanly, but deeply, because now regret is no longer theoretical. Now it lives inside memory, inside all the ordinary moments he didn't realize mattered enough at the time. And the painful truth, those ordinary moments are usually the ones people miss forever. This is the part nobody romanticizes properly, because people love the idea of the runner finally realizing the connection mattered. But they rarely talk about what happens after that realization. The truth, awareness doesn't magically erase fear. Sometimes the fear gets worse, because now he's no longer running from something uncertain. Now he's running while fully aware of what he could lose. And that changes the emotional pressure completely. By this point, he knows he loves her in some real way. Not perfectly. Not cleanly, not maturely all the time, but genuinely. And somehow that truth doesn't calm him down. It destabilizes him further. Because love requires exposure, consistency, accountability, emotional presence. Things he still struggles to sustain even now. That's the contradiction tearing him apart internally. He wants closeness desperately now. But part of him still panics the second intimacy becomes emotionally real again. So his behavior becomes emotionally confusing in new ways. 1 week he sounds certain, present, open, emotionally available in ways she hasn't seen from him before. Then, suddenly, he disappears emotionally again for 2 days after one vulnerable conversation. Not because he stopped caring, because closeness activated fear again. That's what makes this stage so exhausting for both people involved. The longing is real. The love is real. The fear is also real. And all three are fighting for control inside him at the same time. There's one evening where she says something simple during a conversation. You don't have to keep disappearing when things get emotional. And immediately his chest tightens. Because part of him wants to say, I know, I'm trying. But another part of him feels exposed instantly. Defensive. Ashamed. Like she can suddenly see every emotional flaw he spent years hiding behind detachment. So instead of answering honestly, he gets quiet. And afterward he hates himself for that silence. Because now he notices how often fear interrupts vulnerability before it can fully land. That awareness is becoming unbearable lately, especially because he knows she's emotionally tired now. More careful, more observant, less willing to emotionally chase him through his fluctuations. And honestly, that scares him more than almost anything, because now every emotionally distant moment feels risky. Earlier, he assumed the connection would survive his inconsistency. Now, he's not sure anymore. That uncertainty activates panic and avoidance simultaneously, which sounds impossible, but it's real. He becomes terrified of losing her, while also becoming terrified of the emotional responsibility required to truly keep her. That internal split creates emotional whiplash. There are nights where he imagines fully choosing the connection, actually showing up emotionally, being vulnerable consistently, stopping the running completely, and for a few moments it feels peaceful in his mind. Then suddenly fear crashes, and afterward, what if I fail again? What if I hurt her more? What if she sees how emotionally broken I actually am up close? That last fear stays hidden underneath almost everything now. Because underneath the avoidance, underneath the longing, underneath the inconsistency, there's shame. Shame that he may not know how to love steadily even when he genuinely wants to. That realization humbles him deeply. One night he almost tells her everything. Actually everything. The fear, the panic, the emotional confusion, the fact he misses her constantly, the fact intimacy still overwhelms him even though distance hurts worse. He opens the message box, starts typing, deletes it, starts again, deletes it again, because every honest sentence makes him feel emotionally naked. Eventually, he settles for, I've just had a lot on my mind lately, which frustrates him immediately after sending it. Because even now, even while chasing, he still softens the truth into emotionally survivable fragments. That's the thing people misunderstand. The runner becoming the chaser doesn't automatically mean he becomes emotionally articulate. Sometimes he still hides inside vague language while internally drowning in emotion. There's another complicated truth forming inside him too. Part of him still wants escape routes. Even now, even after all the grief, even after realizing what she means to him, that instinct hasn't fully disappeared. Because emotional safety through distance became survival for him long before he met her. And survival patterns don't vanish overnight just because love entered the picture. So sometimes after emotional closeness returns, he feels the urge to withdraw immediately afterward. Not because the intimacy was bad, because it mattered too much. That's the painful irony. The more emotionally real the connection feels, the more vulnerable he feels inside it. And vulnerability still activates fear in his nervous system before it activates comfort. There's one moment that really exposes this contradiction. She tells him she misses him. Simple sentence. soft voice. And for half a second, he feels warmth spread through his entire body. Relief. Then immediately afterward comes panic. Because now there's emotional expectation attached to the connection again. Now he can hurt her again, disappoint her again, fail again. So instead of fully leaning into the moment, he suddenly becomes quieter, more distant. She notices immediately. Of course she does. And the look in her eyes afterward destroys him. Not anger, recognition. Like she's watching the cycle restart in real time. That recognition kills him because now he sees it too. He sees how quickly he retreats after intimacy, how his body reacts to emotional closeness like danger even when his heart wants it desperately. And afterward, he sits alone replaying the conversation obsessively. Why did you pull away again? I don't know. That's not true. Silence. Then eventually, because when she gets close, I feel like I could lose everything. Another silence. Then the deeper truth finally surfaces. And if she leaves after I fully let her in, I don't think I'd survive it emotionally. That's the hidden terror underneath a lot of runners. Not lack of love. The belief that real intimacy creates the possibility of unbearable loss. So they half love, half hide, half run, trying to control pain before it arrives. But now he's learning something devastating. Partial presence creates pain too. Sometimes more. Because now he's watching the woman he loves slowly become emotionally cautious around him. That reality wrecks him quietly. He notices it in tiny things. The way she hesitates before opening up emotionally now. The way she waits before trusting his warmth fully. The subtle emotional guarding in her tones sometimes. And he understands why. That's the painful part. He understands. Which means he can no longer hide behind the illusion that his inconsistency only hurt him. Now he sees the nervous system impact clearly. The uncertainty, the emotional instability, the exhaustion, and the guilt attached to that realization sometimes makes him want to run all over again. Not because he doesn't care, because he cares and feels incapable of doing it perfectly. That perfectionism becomes another form of avoidance. If I can't love her perfectly, maybe I should leave her alone. But another part of him immediately pushes back against that thought now. No, you just don't want to feel responsible for the damage. That internal voice has become sharper lately, more honest, less willing to let him emotionally escape himself. And honestly, that's exhausting too. Because now there's nowhere left to hide internally. No clean narrative where he's simply misunderstood. No story where he feels nothing. No version where distance solved anything. Now he's standing face to face with the complexity of himself. A man who genuinely loves someone and still sometimes wants to run when the love becomes too real. A man who misses her constantly and still occasionally fantasizes about disappearing emotionally because vulnerability overwhelms him. A man who wants closeness, while fearing what closeness demands from him psychologically. That contradiction becomes his emotional reality now, not temporary confusion, reality. And one of the hardest truths he starts realizing is this: love didn't fail because the feelings weren't real. Love became difficult because fear kept interrupting intimacy before intimacy could stabilize. That realization sits heavily inside him one night while driving home alone. Hands tight on the steering wheel. Mind exhausted from overthinking. Streetlights passing rhythmically across the windshield. And suddenly he whispers something out loud he's never fully admitted before. I'm scared of how much I need her. The silence afterward feels enormous. Because finally, after months of running, chasing, avoiding, longing, he's finally touching the real wound underneath all of it. Not love, fear of loss, fear of dependence, fear that being fully loved means being fully destroyable too. And part of him still doesn't know how to live inside that vulnerability without wanting to escape it. I think people want this story to end neatly. That's the truth. They want the runner to finally realize everything, come back transformed, say the perfect words, and suddenly become emotionally available forever. They want closure, redemption, a satisfying emotional arc. But real human behavior usually isn't that clean. Sometimes the runner becomes the chaser and still remains emotionally conflicted. Sometimes he understands the connection deeply and still struggles to stay emotionally steady inside it. Sometimes he comes back carrying love in one hand and fear in the other. And honestly, that's what makes this whole thing so painful. Because by the end of it, he usually knows. He knows she mattered. He knows the connection changed him. He knows the distance didn't protect him the way he thought it would. But knowledge and transformation are not always the same thing. That's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of this. There's this moment that happens quietly for a lot of runners. Not dramatic, just deeply internal. A moment where they realize they spent months trying to escape emotional vulnerability, only to become emotionally consumed by the absence anyway. And suddenly the whole strategy collapses psychologically. All the distancing, all the emotional control, all the I just need space. It didn't stop the attachment. It only delayed the grief. That realization humbles him in ways almost nothing else can. Especially because by now, he's no longer idealizing himself. Earlier, he could still hide inside confusion. Now, he sees the contradictions clearly. How he wanted reassurance while withholding reassurance. How he feared abandonment while emotionally abandoning someone else first. How he craved closeness while punishing intimacy every time it became too real. That level of self-awareness hurts. Not in a poetic way, in a deeply human way. The kind that makes someone sit in silence after conversations, replaying their own behavior over and over. The kind that makes a man stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m. realizing he hurt someone he genuinely loved because fear kept disguising itself as self-protection. And the worst part, sometimes the regret arrives after the other person has emotionally changed already. That's the piece nobody prepares him for. Because when she finally stops chasing, when she finally starts protecting her own peace, when her nervous system stops reaching toward him automatically, he feels it immediately, not always consciously at first, but physically. The emotional access changes, the warmth changes, the emotional openness changes, the safety he unconsciously relied on changes, and suddenly he realizes something terrifying. Love is not infinite just because it was deep. People can get tired, even people who loved you honestly. That truth breaks something inside him, especially because part of him assumed she would always emotionally stay. Not because he consciously wanted to take advantage of her love. Because emotionally avoidant people often mistake consistency for permanence. They don't realize the other person has limits too, until those limits finally appear. And by then panic usually enters the story. Not romantic panic, not cinematic, messy panic, late night overthinking, emotional spirals, checking old messages repeatedly, replaying memories until ordinary moments start hurting more than dramatic ones. That's the strange thing about grief after emotional avoidance. It becomes painfully specific. He doesn't just miss her generally. He misses her exact humanity. The way she tucked her legs underneath herself on the couch. The way she got quiet when heard instead of yelling. The way she looked at him during ordinary moments when she thought he wasn't paying attention. And maybe he wasn't fully paying attention back then. That realization stays with him. There's one image that keeps returning for him over and over. Her standing in the kitchen one morning half awake, wearing one of his old shirts, making coffee quietly while sunlight came through the window. Nothing dramatic happened. No emotional conversation. No life-changing moment. She was just there, present, loving him in ordinary ways he didn't fully understand the value of until later. And now that memory hurts more than almost anything. Because now he understands intimacy differently. Not as intensity, not as obsession, as presence, as consistency, as emotional safety, as someone quietly choosing you in small moments over and over again. And maybe part of him only learned the value of that after losing the emotional certainty of it. That's the tragedy sometimes. Not all emotional understanding arrives on time. Some people become emotionally aware inside absence, inside regret, inside silence. And the truth is sometimes he really did love her the entire time. That's what makes these dynamics so emotionally complicated. He wasn't always running because the connection lacked meaning. Sometimes he ran because the meaning overwhelmed him. Because intimacy activated fear. Because love threatened emotional control. Because vulnerability made him feel psychologically exposed in ways he didn't know how to regulate. None of that excuses the hurt, but it explains the contradiction. And human beings are full of contradiction, especially wounded ones. There's this internal conversation he has one night that finally feels honest in a way the others didn't. You loved her. Yes. Then why did you keep running? Because I thought distance would protect me. Did it? Long silence. Then quietly. No. Another silence. Then the deeper truth finally surfaces. It just made me lose her slowly instead. That realization lands heavily. Because now he understands something devastating. Avoidance didn't save him from heartbreak. It participated in creating it. And honestly, that's hard to live with. Especially for someone who genuinely never intended to become the source of emotional instability for the person they love most. That's another truth people oversimplify online. Not every runner is cold. Not every runner is narcissistic. Not every runner is consciously manipulating someone. Sometimes they're just emotionally unequipped for the depth of what they're feeling. Sometimes they panic inside intimacy and don't fully understand why until the relationship is already damaged. Sometimes they mistake emotional overwhelm for incompatibility. And sometimes they wake up too late. That's the part people in comment sections always argue about. Why did he wait until she pulled away? Because certainty hides emotional consequences. That's why, as long as her love still felt accessible, he could emotionally avoid full accountability. But once the connection stopped feeling guaranteed, everything became real. The loss, the longing, the emotional dependence, the regret. And now he finally understands what she was carrying emotionally all those months alone. The waiting, the confusion, the emotional loneliness. Now he lives inside pieces of it too. And maybe that's the cruel symmetry of all this. Eventually, the runner often feels the emotional uncertainty they once created. Not as punishment, just as consequence. Human consequence. There's no perfect ending here. Sometimes they reconnect. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes he grows. Sometimes fear still wins in certain moments. Sometimes she still loves him, but can no longer survive the inconsistency emotionally. And sometimes he changes deeply, but only after the relationship already transformed both people permanently. That's real life. Not every story resolves cleanly. Not every realization arrives early enough to save something. But maybe the deepest truth underneath the runner becoming the chaser is this. People think he starts chasing because he finally understands love. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes he starts chasing because the silence finally became louder than his avoidance. Because the absence stopped feeling peaceful. Because distractions stopped working. Because grief eventually reached the parts of him distance couldn't numb anymore. And somewhere between the loneliness, the regret, the memories, the late-night overthinking, he finally understood something he spent months trying not to feel. She wasn't hard to love. She was hard to lose.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.